Okay, here's a common mistake students make with this typology of tests. And what's out there when talking about especially process tracing, Stephen Van Evera tried to encapsulate the concepts of necessity and sufficiency in this kind of colloquial labeling of different types of tests. And we have smoking gun, hoop, straw in the wind. And this was picked up by Bennett and Collier, and these are very common. The mistake students make is thinking these are actual types of tests, when in fact, these are the possible types of causal inference one can draw from any particular test. So this is an important thing. And the idea here is that you are going to construct a test, right? And you are then going to look at that test and assess what type of causal inference you can make from it, right? And is this observation that is in some way predicted by a theory that you are going out to look at? We either see the predicted observation, so we see something that's would be predicted by the theory in a particular case, or we don't. The question is how, what significance, what logical import do we put on this, right? What's the causal inference one draws? A smoking gun test, hey, if we find it, that's just proof positive, just right there. That's sufficient to show to support the theory. A hoop test, you got to jump through a hoop in order for this case. It's about necessity, right? And so I'm not going to go too much into these. What I want to go in is the distinction between the test and the causal inference, the type of causal inference. And I think some of the confusion is when we talk about the first one, the smoking gun, right? If you find someone with a smoking gun, that's the test, right? That's the observation, right? The fact that we then say is sufficient to prove they committed the crime. So that conflates, in that case, we're conflating the test with the type of causal inference you can make. The hoop test is perhaps better for this in the sense that if you're investigating a crime, the most common type of hoop test would be finding that your suspect does not have an alibi, right? Because if they have an alibi, they could not have committed the crime. So they fail to, your theory that they committed the crime fails to jump through the hoop. And here we have a distinction, right? There's no hoop, right? No one ever thinks there's a hoop. It's the test is finding out if the person has an alibi. And if they don't have an alibi, that in this case would be passing the test. And but it doesn't prove they did the crime, right? It just says it's possible. So we failed to eliminate them. And it's a hoop test. Now, we're going to call it a hoop test because it's the type of causal inference one can get, but it isn't an actual test. I know I'm laboring this point, but very frequently students get very misled into thinking, oh, I can do a hoop test. And they're not focusing on what test can I do? What is something the theory would predict that could be observed? That's the test, right? Then you say, all right, so what's it mean if I observe or don't observe it? And that's when we get into the type of causal inference, and we can characterize that, that predicted, right? Looking for that it's called a predicted empirical manifestation in process tracing. Looking for that's the test. We can categorize it by what type of causal inference we can make from it. That's the distinction here. I hope this helps.